We're going to continue our series on boundaries tonight, and I'm so excited to talk about what I consider in my own personal journey to be probably one of the hardest walkouts of my recovery. Boundaries are difficult, and last week we talked about how boundaries show up between me and me, which is very parallel to our process of a recovery journey, recovery from whatever you're recovering from, whether that's trauma, whether that's substances, whether it's both. Our belief is what our culture calls addiction. At the Healing Collective, we call numbing and medicating. And that is a behavior that's helping us survive some unhealed wound. So when we look at boundaries, that's part of our way out of survival. Boundaries are the exit ramp on the interstate where I'm so tired of doing the same old shit over and over again and expecting a different result. Thank you, Einstein. To an exit ramp where we can start to use these new behaviors or these new coping skills that initially when we use them, I'm going to speak in the I was really uncomfortable and I really didn't like the outcome. Well, not the outcome, the reaction typically. So as we talk about boundaries, last week we talked about how stepping into boundaries has a lot to do with stepping out of polarized thinking, all or nothing, being in the rigidity of pathology, thinking that doing the exact opposite is the best outcome. And what we know about that is usually not all or nothing, not black or white, not the rigidity, but somewhere in the center, somewhere in the gray area is the healthiest thing for me. So I wanted to talk about boundaries tonight with family of origin. I guess I can't hear any sighs because you all are muted, but I'm making up that maybe there were some sighs in the room. So a family of origin is whoever raised you. That can be biological family, that could be foster family, that could be grandparents if that's who raised you. But when you're looking at your family of origin or you're looking at your backstory, that's the work that you're doing with my team to really understand the generational patterns. And when we think of boundaries, the reason that I wanted to talk about it tonight, because the hardest part for me is doing boundaries with me and then doing boundaries with me and some of the oldest relationships that I've had, which is my family of origin. It's whoever shows up in my backstory. And because I'm a recovering codependent and I also fill the role of hero and mascot, boundaries were not comfortable for me to put in place. And oftentimes when I'm doing clinical work or I'm supporting fellow travelers or other people in recovery, I hear a lot of boundaries that they don't give themselves credit for. So I want to talk a little bit tonight about what do boundaries look like with family of origin? And just because I don't call it a boundary, is it still a boundary? I'm going to guess yes, 9 times out of 10. So when I look back at my family, your family is a good thing if your family doesn't look like this. And if there's any part of this that you identify with, noticing what comes up for you and noticing what comes up in your body. When you think of family of origin and dysfunction, typically that includes some type of verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, absence, lack of consistency or unpredictability. Any of those things within a family system creates dysfunction. And for some of us, it wasn't longitudinal, which means it wasn't your whole childhood. And for some of us, it was parts of your childhood or different times or maybe even different caregivers. But when I think back to my story, I grew up on a farm. My dad, also an ACA or adult child of alcoholic and dysfunctional families, but he didn't know it because it didn't exist for him. He coped with his trauma from the Navy and from childhood through alcohol and through work. And the way that that trickled down to us was it didn't matter how old we were. If we could be participating somehow on the farm, we did. And you didn't stop. I didn't stop. We didn't stop until Dad stopped or until it got dark. So coming home from school, we would do homework and we would go outside. And that may instill a great work ethic for some people. And maybe that's what it sounds like when my grandparents say, your girls are such hard workers. And my recovery today informs me that my home was boundaryless. There was no appropriate roles within my family. Kids were doing adult chores. I think I said last time, I was driving a tractor and baling hay by the time I was 10. That's dangerous as hell. I loved it, don't get me wrong, but very dangerous. And when it comes to rules or expectations, we didn't have a lot because it took one look from my dad or one look from my mom. So there wasn't a lot of spoken rules or understanding or expectations. We just knew not to piss them off. So being the youngest of 4 girls, the other thing that happened was we would really take care of each other. My sisters became my caretakers and they would protect me from my parents. And somehow I got put into the role of protecting my mom from my dad at a very early age because I would be really cute and really funny. And so anytime Dad started fussing at Mom or the tension got high, I knew what to do very young, 5, 6 years old. Again, another example of a boundaryless relationship and home, because that was not my responsibility and it was not my role, but it was very much the role within my dysfunctional family system, because Am can come in and calm Dad down and he'll stop messing with Mom. So when you think of boundaryless homes, I want you to think about how the roles are confused and where there is dysfunctional responsibility. That can be around relationship, that can be around food, that can be around babysitting or taking care of siblings, being parentified. If you're familiar with that term, I could do a whole series on that. But if you're parentified, it's basically this meaning that you're a child and you're fulfilling adult roles and responsibilities. So what does that mean and what does that do? Well, basically, raised in a boundaryless home, social relationships are really hard growing up. We didn't know boundaries. We didn't know what to share and what not to share. And we really didn't even know that what happened in our family didn't happen in every family. We thought this is what all families were like. This level of dysfunction and codependency. And in our social relationships, my sisters and I, not knowing how to interact with people and being so scared that somebody might find out. But we didn't know what they were going to find out because we didn't know how we were different or what was wrong. We just knew something was wrong. So I can remember in high school, I had a phys ed teacher that would let me hide in her room during lunch break and during any breaks. And she would turn off the light and lock the door so nobody would come in because she could sense my level of anxiety on a daily basis. And it was kind of my little cave. It was what would bring me comfort. So walking through college and getting into recovery and doing therapy, I started to learn that some of the shit that happened in my childhood was not normal. And again, we didn't know. We just knew it didn't feel good in our body. I knew it didn't feel good in my body, but I didn't know what was happening that was any different from any other family. And the further I got into recovery, the things that started to help me realize why I needed boundaries is because I would be responsible for everyone. I was very codependent. I was very good at everything I did, taking care of all my friends and blah, blah, blah in college. But I want you to think of the difference that happens in your body when I say, are you responsible for that? Or are you responsible to that? Do you notice a shift or a difference in your body when I change those words? It's one of the biggest tools that I use personally, but I also teach because it helps me know what my boundaries are. It helps me know where I end and the next person begins. And so, things that I do today that are usually met with resistance, and I teach that's how you know you did it right. When my family of origin, my sisters or my mom, are here around my kids and they attempt to parent my children, my boundary is you don't have to be his mom. He has one. I don't say it quite so sarcastically. And the intention for me in my recovery is to come from a loving place. Or it might sound like, I don't need you to parent him. I need you to just love him. That's your job as auntie. Just love him. Both of my boys have sensory problems, and none of my sisters or my mom have spent any time trying to understand what that means. And it makes it really difficult for them to have positive interactions with my boys. Number one, because they're trying to do old shit that doesn't work and is dysfunctional. But number two, it's because they're making it about them rather than recognizing it ain't about them. They're supposed to be emotional available to my kids. So oftentimes my boundaries today look like supporting my family of origin in interacting with my boys in a safe way. And the safety is for my boys, not for my family of origin. They're adults. They can take care of themselves. The other thing that looks like boundaries for me today and how I show up differently is a really hard boundary that I struggled with for a long time is my mom and my sisters, because I'm the youngest, well, I'm 43 years old and I'm still called the baby girl. They like to tell me how I feel, and they're never right. And so I would just have this internal struggle and then would get to the point where I could use a boundary with them and I could say, if you want to know how I feel about that, ask me. You don't have to assume how I feel. I was trying to take the pressure off of them and I was trying to do it in a loving way. And what I can tell you is when it comes to boundaries in the oldest relationships we have, they will be met with resistance because something I'm doing differently is changing my role, which means I no longer caretake the rest of the system. And rightfully so, they get pissed about that because they want me in my role because that makes the rest of the system flow better in dysfunction. So when I don't participate in the dysfunction, they don't like it as much. I'm also the only one in recovery of my family. So it makes it difficult for us to interact for long periods of time. But when you think of boundaries and you think of family of origins, my hope that you're going to take away from this is you may not have known the boundaries that you needed. It may not have been modeled for you because they didn't have it. And the further along we get in our recovery, the more I color myself in and the more clearly I can notice when I need a boundary. And typically that's a body response, not a thought process. I feel something in my body, I figure out what it is, and then I go back with a boundary. So I'll talk more about another tool at the end. And this is boundaries with me and family of origin, and it's an ongoing process. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. I want to open it up to you for experience, strength, and hope. And I'll share more at the end of the tool. When you think of responsible for, I want you to think of taking on a load. I become responsible for another person. And there is actual relationships in our lives where that is true. And I want you to think of where that's applicable. Typically, we are responsible for dependent children, pets. If we are adult caretakers for aging parents or grandparents, when someone is dependent on me to meet needs, that's when I'm responsible for someone. I am responsible to many things. I have a responsibility to this meeting. I hold it with high priority and have for 4 years because it's so important to me. And I'm also responsible to my husband because we have a commitment. We have an agreement. We signed a piece of paper, although that doesn't mean much to us. We have a friendship. So I'm responsible to my husband, but I am not responsible for him, nor is he responsible for me. And I want to offer a reframe because I've had people challenge this numerous times, and that's okay. Challenge. I like the challenge. Yes, if my husband is sick, yes, if my husband is struggling, or vice versa, there is a different level of balance. And when I think of responsible, I think of our recovery. And I honor my husband by not taking responsibility for his recovery program because that would be codependent as hell. It was also a part of my world at one time. And I refuse to go back there because by being responsible for his program, what I'm saying to him is, I don't trust you to do it. When I'm responsible to him and we show up in agreement with how we're going to walk that out, when his pathology is affecting my recovery or when my pathology is affecting his recovery, there's a conversation about that. And it's very clear using those words. And that's how I honor him. And that's how he honors me because it's my program. Nobody's going to tell me how to run it or do it, nor do I have any reason to be telling him how to run his program. So I don't pretend to be anyone else's higher power anymore. And I'm very grateful for that because that's what codependency does to me. Way too much fucking pressure. And I like to just be responsible for me, my safety, and my babies because I know my husband does the other half of that. He does the same thing. So when we think of responsible to versus responsible for, when I'm feeling responsible for someone's care, for someone's safety, as therapists, I frequently have to reframe for my team. Guys, we are not responsible for someone's safety. We don't have any power or control over that. We are responsible to someone's safety by making sure we have offered everything that we can offer. And I think that shows up similarly as parents. I know that's scary. And I am responsible for my child. And the older my child gets, my bonus son is about to be 16 at the end of the month, scares the shit out of me because I have less power and control, and he is influenced by so much. So responsible to versus responsible for helps me stay aligned. It helps me stay in my role, but it also helps me honor the people that I love, even when they don't think I'm honoring them. Sometimes they think I'm not helping. Well, they're right, because I want to support, not help. There's a difference. The other thing I want to mention is there's a principle of ACA that says this is not about blame and fault. This is about fact. And the reason that that is so important to me, one of the reasons, is because the more I own my story, the more I color myself in, the more authentic and whole I become. And I don't know about you guys, but I wasn't born whole. I was born for the purpose of making my mom happy. So in utero, I was codependent. And I haven't been whole since I was born until I reached recovery. So it's no one else's job to respect my boundaries. It is my honor to get to respect my boundaries by being consistent with them. People are supposed to try my boundaries. They're supposed to challenge me. They're supposed to try to fit back in where their pathology fits because it's comfortable for them, not because they're trying to hurt me. However, that's not how I choose to show up anymore. It is my job and my honor to make sure my boundaries are respected. And sometimes they're not. So looking at where that relationship is in the gray area that brings me safety. My safety is what matters to me. That is my job. That is my responsibility. No one else's. When I'm in, and sorry, I know I'm running out of time. When I'm in a scenario, the other tool that I wanted to offer is the recognition and the intention of using reparenting. Several of you gave beautiful examples of this. And what I'm reparenting is my inner child. When I say to my mom, I don't need you to parent my boys. I just want you to be their Mima and love on them. That's a boundary for me. And that usually pisses her off. And I get it. She's trying to make it easier, but that's not what they need. They need to express. So when I'm reparenting by keeping me calm and by using a boundary with my mom, and I don't lose it and I don't get pissed off, that's a big deal. So the reparenting is what we're working towards. And when I'm using those boundaries with family of origin, there is nothing to explain. Children explain, adults inform. When I'm in my adult self, I inform. When I shrink into my inner child, I try to explain and get approval.